midst of nature, we are often imbued with a spiritual serenity, contentment, and a stark feeling of resilience. However, this particular tree in a patch of Florida State Park, bound by a labyrinth of sinuous trails, has a more ominous and macabre aura. An invisible but imposing presence is known to interfere with electrical gear and evoke goosebumps in passerbys. Join us as we delve into a story of murder born from the mind of a depraved police officer who became Florida's first serial killer, and the legend of a cursed tree that refuses to be removed. A tree that summons Satanists and elicits accidents in those who cross it. Despite the disappointment of the big ideals of the 1960s and the disillusionment at the ineffectiveness of their fight for change, teens and young adults in the early 70s still posed that had fueled their older siblings. It was commonplace for children to wander the neighborhood unsupervised, and hitchhiking with strangers was an oft-used means of locomotion for older kids who lacked their own rides. But in Central Florida, there was a predator preying on pretty young girls who dared to throw out their thumb, and he hid under the assumed trustworthiness of a badge. On April 1st, 1973, a father and son hunting for cans and other recyclable refuse in an isolated patch of fern-ridden forest in Port St. Lucie, Florida, stumbled upon scattered remains partially buried under a 100-year oak. This was the tree that was later to be known as the Devil's Tree, as the full horror of what happened there would be unveiled. The remains were quickly identified as Georgia Jessup, 16, and Susan Place, 17. They had gone missing from Fort Lauderdale on September 27th of the previous year. Identified from dental records that were compared to jawbones and teeth found among the incomplete remains, it was obvious the victims had been tied up before their deaths. But who had brutalized these two young girls on the cusp of adulthood? The local authorities had a pretty good idea. A Florida police officer had been found guilty of the 1972 assault of two teenage girls with eerily similar circumstances. Luckily, these girls had escaped. However, to understand the full savagery of the tale of the Devil's Tree, one must refer to the details of their ordeal and the methods of a depraved killer. Nancy Trotter and Patricia Sue Wells were crestfallen when the police officer pulled up behind them and asked what they thought they were doing. Hitchhiking is illegal, you know. But he was nice enough. The all-American 26-year-old promised to take the young girls to the beach the next day if they would meet him. And meet him they did. But instead of the beach, he asked if they wanted to go see an old Spanish fort. They began to drive further and further into the back roads of Florida. As he pulled over to the side of a desolate road, the girls' sense of dread began to rise. As a ruse to restrain them, he told them that he was going to book them for being runaways, and though they were not, they complied. I mean, he was a police officer. "How would you like to be sold into white slavery?" he taunted, wondering aloud how much he might get for them, and if their parents would even bother to put up a ransom. He gagged and bound both of the girls, fastening Trotter's noose around a tree while having her stand on a root so that she would be forced to stand precariously upon it or risk choking herself. Lucky for the girls, soon after this, he was interrupted by a radio call and had to rush away. "I'll be back," he promised, telling the girls that he had to go meet the man who was buying them. The girls chewed and twisted and writhed until they both freed themselves in his absence and made their way to the road, where they were rescued and taken to the local police station to tell of their ordeal. When Schaefer returned and saw they had escaped, he immediately called his supervisor, saying, "I did something stupid." He maintained he was trying to simply teach the girls a lesson about the hazards of hitchhiking before they ran into someone bad. His supervisor fired him on the spot, and he was in fact out on bail on false imprisonment and assault charges stemming from this when he killed Jessup and Place at the Devil's Tree. Doing doubles is far more difficult than doing singles, Schaefer later wistfully recalled. But on the other hand, it also puts one in a position to have twice as much fun. There can be some lively discussions about which of the victims will be killed first. When you have a pair of lively teenage bimbalinas bound hand and foot and ready for a session with the skinning knife, neither one of those little devils wants to be the one to go first, and they don't mind telling you quickly why their best friend should be the one to die. Some say Schaefer's luck went awry when he strayed too far from the protection of the tree, as if the burial mound on nearby Hutchinson Island and other influences had imbued this particular tree with a certain kind of devilish lust and malevolence. This sordid past has made the Devil's Tree in Oak Hammock Park a pilgrimage for local youths who consider themselves theological Satanists. Previously, a large hole in the middle of the tree wept black sap that some thought might give their rituals a special kind of potency. It has since been filled up. On occasion, one might observe the wax of candles burn bright in the night around the Devil's Tree. One couple even saw a cat carrier left by its side. Those who had ventured about the grounds at night have witnessed hooded figures lurking in the brush. Because of these things, the city has tried several times to rid the beautiful park of the veritable pockmark of the tree. Once they hired two men with chainsaws to cut it down. When the bits in both chainsaws broke, they dutifully loaded up their gear to go get new ones. But the men died in a head-on collision before they could make it back. Many have attributed this ill fate to the pieces of the tree being embedded in the chainsaw. But legend heeds a warning to anyone who dare take a piece of the bark for their own selfish deeds. There also exists the story of a lady whose husband had a wandering eye. She ventured into the park to scrape off some of the bark to place in her cheating husband's car as a curse. Instead, she herself wrecked as soon as she pulled out of the park. Later efforts saw the park try to poison the roots, but as you see, the at least 150-year-old oak stands strong to this day. Do you believe some places soak in the evil deeds that have befallen around them? Have you visited the Devil's Tree or any other place that has made your skin crawl? Tell us in the comments.